Rain lashed against the windshield. Arjun squinted, barely able to see through the deluge. The forest pressed close, a wall of dark shapes against the storm's fury. He gripped the steering wheel, knuckles white. His headlights cut through the fog, illuminating little more than the downpour's relentless assault. The road, slick with rain, seemed to stretch endlessly before him. Every shadow held a lurking menace, every gust of wind whispered a warning. Arjun just wanted to be home, safe from the storm's wrath. He pressed on, engine straining against the elements. The storm had blown in with unexpected ferocity, transforming the evening drive into a treacherous ordeal. He cursed his decision to take the shortcut through the old forest road. Now, with every mile, he felt a growing sense of unease. The storm seemed to press in on him, a malevolent entity determined to swallow him whole. He shivered, trying to shake off the feeling. He had to stay focused. He had to get out of this storm. Thunder cracked, a deafening roar that shook the car. The headlights flickered, plunging the world into momentary darkness. Arjun slammed on the brakes, heart pounding in his chest. The car skidded, tires losing their grip on the treacherous road. He fought for control, but it was no use. With a sickening crunch, the car veered off the road and slammed into a tree. The engine sputtered and died, leaving Arjun in stunned silence. Rain continued to hammer down, mocking his predicament. He was stranded. Arjun shook his head, trying to clear the fog of shock. He was unharmed, thankfully, but his car was dead. He was alone, miles from any town, trapped in the heart of the storm. Fear, cold and sharp, pricked at the edges of his mind. He took a deep breath, forcing himself to stay calm. Panicking wouldn't help. He had to think. He fumbled for his phone, hoping for a signal, but the storm had other plans. No service, of course. He slumped back in his seat, a wave of despair washing over him. He was truly alone. The storm raged outside, a symphony of wind and rain. Each gust seemed to shake the car. Each flash of lightning illuminated the forest in an eerie, fleeting glow. Time crawled by, marked by the relentless rhythm of the storm. Arjun huddled in his coat, the cold seeping into his bones. He tried to ignore the gnawing fear in his gut, the feeling of being watched, but it was no use. The forest seemed to press closer, filled with unseen eyes. He started at every creak of the car, every rustle of leaves outside. His imagination conjured shapes in the darkness, his pulse quickening with each passing moment. He tried to distract himself, but his thoughts kept circling back to his predicament. He was vulnerable, alone, at the mercy of the storm, and whatever else might lurk in the shadows of the forest. He closed his eyes, trying to shut out the fear, but it was no use. The storm raged on, a constant reminder of his isolation. He thought he heard a sound, a faint tapping against the car window. He opened his eyes, peering into the darkness. The wind howled, whipping the branches against the car. He told himself it was just the storm, but a shiver ran down his spine. He couldn't shake the feeling that he was no longer alone. The tapping came again, more insistent this time. It was a slow, deliberate rhythm, like fingers drumming against the glass. Arjun's heart pounded in his ears. He turned his head slowly, dreading what he might see. The tapping stopped. Silence descended, heavier than before. Arjun held his breath, every sense on high alert. Then a face appeared in the window, a face that made his blood run cold. It was pale, almost translucent, with eyes that glowed an unnatural green in the darkness. Its lips were drawn back in a grotesque grin, revealing rows of sharp teeth. Arjun recoiled in horror, a scream trapped in his throat. The figure outside the window tilted its head, as if studying him. Its eyes, cold and calculating, seemed to bore into his very soul. The figure raised its hand, its long, bony fingers tapping against the glass once more. The rhythmic tapping resumed, slow and deliberate. Arjun cowered in his seat, paralyzed by fear. He couldn't tear his gaze away from the horrifying apparition outside. Who was it? What did it want? The questions echoed silently in his mind, lost in the whirlwind of terror that threatened to consume him. The tapping continued, each sound a hammer blow against his sanity. Section 4. A Ghastly Visitation. Arjun squeezed his eyes shut, willing the horrifying vision to disappear. But the tapping continued, relentless, echoing in the confines of the car. He couldn't escape it. He slowly opened his eyes, bracing himself for the sight that awaited him. The figure was gone. He let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding, relief washing over him in waves. Had he imagined it? Was it just a trick of the storm, playing on his fear? He wanted to believe so. He looked around, his heart still pounding in his chest. The storm raged on, but the forest seemed less menacing now. He had convinced himself it was all in his head, a product of stress and exhaustion. He leaned back, trying to calm his racing thoughts. That's when he saw it. A single, muddy handprint on the car window, right where the figure's face had been. Panic surged through him, extinguishing his fleeting relief. It hadn't been a hallucination. The creature was real. He scrambled to start the car, desperate to escape, but the engine remained dead. He was trapped, at the mercy of whatever lurked outside. He felt a cold dread creep up his spine, a sense of impending doom that he couldn't shake off. He was alone, with only the storm and the memory of that ghastly face for company, and the handprint, a chilling reminder that he wasn't imagining things. His past mistakes, long buried, began to surface in his mind, whispering of guilt and retribution. Section 5. Sins of the Past. Years ago, on a night much like this one, he had been driving home after a night of heavy drinking. He had been careless, reckless. He had hit something that ran out in front of his car. He hadn't stopped to check. He had been too scared, too drunk. He had convinced himself it was just an animal. But the guilt had lingered, a shadow in the back of his mind. Was this his punishment? Had his past finally caught up with him in this desolate stretch of forest? He looked at the handprint again, its smudged outline a symbol of his own transgression. Fear turned to ice in his veins. He understood now. He wasn't alone in the storm. He was being hunted. The tapping on the window resumed, this time accompanied by a low, guttural growl. It was close. He could feel its presence outside the car, a palpable sense of menace that sent shivers down his spine. His breath hitched in his throat. He knew with chilling certainty that he couldn't outrun his past. He could only face it. He slowly turned his head towards the source of the sound, bracing himself for the inevitable confrontation. His blood pounded in his ears, a drumbeat of fear against the symphony of the storm. He closed his eyes, accepting his fate. Section 6. Vanished without a trace. The following morning, the storm abated. Sunlight filtered through the trees, illuminating the rain-soaked forest. Birdsong filled the air, a stark contrast to the previous night's fury. A lone police car arrived at the scene of the accident. The officer approached the crashed vehicle cautiously. The driver's side door was ajar, swinging gently in the breeze. The officer peered inside, his brow furrowing in confusion. The car was empty. The driver was gone. The only sign of struggle was a single muddy handprint on the dashboard, its outline stark against the leather. It was a handprint that matched no known database, a chilling enigma in the aftermath of the storm. The officer scanned the surrounding woods, but there was no trace of the missing driver, no indication of where he might have gone. The forest held its secrets close, the silence broken only by the chirping of birds and the whisper of the wind through the leaves. The case remained unsolved, another mystery claimed by the dense, ancient forest. Locals whispered tales of the storm, of strange occurrences and vengeful spirits. They spoke of a ghostly figure that haunted the old road, seeking retribution for past transgressions. And though no one could say for sure what happened to the missing driver, one thing was certain. The forest held its secrets close, and some mysteries were never meant to be solved. The handprint remained, a chilling reminder of the night the storm took more than just a car.